Hello, I'm Frank, your host of Reader's Labyrinth. We've all been there, looking for decent horror fiction on YouTube, only to find yet another channel churning out endless Reddit stories. If that's your thing, then more power to you. For those of us, however, who prefer original tales narrated by the author themselves, the pickings can be quite slim. Thankfully for me, I discovered Tony Capobianco last year and his YouTube channel, The Haunted Half Moon Inn. The Half Moon is a jumble of real-life experiences by the author and some fiction elements blended in the first few episodes. Tony later flexes his horror muscles and soon introduces us to the staples of commercial horror: werewolves, vampires, and witches, all with cool plot twists presented to us in a folksy narration. You can find his work on his YouTube channel, a link in the show notes and pinned comment. Follow him on Twitter as well. Also, since Tony puts in a ton of work and his stories are so cool, would you please consider signing up for his Patreon account, link in the show notes provided. And also, as a personal side note, I would like to say that I really enjoy hosting Reader's Labyrinth, and I hope that you derive some form of value from this. And I would ask that you would consider subscribing to my channel, hitting that like button, and turning the notifications on. And if you've enjoyed the interview with Tony as much as I have, then please share this video. Thank you. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tony to Reader's Labyrinth. Good evening, Tony. How you doing?
I'm really great. Thanks, Frank. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing great, man. I'm really amped up for this interview.
Me too.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Same here, man. Same here. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I know that we're both busy. We have stuff going on, but I really believe in your work. I believe in the Haunted Half Moon Inn. I think it's some really good fiction, and it's original fiction is what it is. And that's probably the point that really impressed me the most, because there's a lot of fiction out there where folks will read stuff off of Reddit, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. Viewers, if you're listening and you read stories off of Reddit, you have a YouTube channel yourself, that's perfectly fine. No complaints from us.
I'll listen to some of that as well sometimes.
Okay. Awesome, man. Same here. You know, there's some dark stories too floating around on Reddit.
So. Yeah, I'm not a snob when it comes to that. I like all different kinds of stuff. Whether it's original or if it's copy pasta, I like it all.
Oh, for sure. Have you heard those old podcasts where like they take the old creepypastas from like the 30s and 40s and 50s and they'll remake them?
I haven't come across that yet.
Okay, note to self, I'm definitely sending you a link to that so you can get a hold of that.
Excellent.
So, Tony, tell me, my man, what made you want to enter the horror genre?
Well, really, I've been a fan of horror my whole life, so it was kind of a no-brainer for me. But my dad got me into it when I was young, and I just never really looked back. I've always just felt a certain sense of comfort in horror, and my dad passed a little over 10 years ago, so when I watch horror, I kind of feel like I'm back with him. So there's kind of that emotional part to it. And apart from that, I just love good stories. And I think that horror is it's a great genre because it's a great way to just communicate good versus evil. So it takes everything that you have in other genres, but you get an epic scale to it. Something that you can't do if you're just telling, let's say you have a corrupt corporation as the villain. It's not the same thing as if you have, let's say, Pennywise, or you have Michael Myers or a Dracula. It's just an entirely different scale. So I think that's a big part of it.
I'm really hearing you on the emotional component of that answer, because what really got me into horror was my late mother. And I can remember staying up till 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night when I was probably 10, 11, or 12. And we would watch, the feared R-rated horror movies. And
yeah.
My entrance into the genre was definitely the old Hammer films with Dracula.
Oh, nice. Love
Oh
those.
yeah, yeah, and my mother loved those films. Dracula was her favorite monster. So I was kind of raised on Frank Langella. I was raised on the 1990 or 91 version of Dracula. I think it had
The
Gary
Bram Stoker
Oldman in
one?
it. That's
Oh,
right.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Bram Stoker's. Yep, by I believe it was Scorsese did that one.
That's
No,
right.
Francis Ford
No,
Coppola.
no, that was
Francis
Francis
Ford Coppola.
Ford Coppola. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was kind of raised on the classics, But for me personally, the monster that always scared me the most was werewolves, hands down. That was.
Yeah, I like werewolves. Probably what scared me the most would be anything with possession, because I always believed
Mm.
that good versus evil and that spirits are real. So for me, something like The Exorcist, it could happen. So it just terrified me because it's something that you can't see. And I suppose maybe that's where my one tagline comes from. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there. Because when you think of demons or an evil spirit, it's probably about the creepiest thing you could think of. Like if you think it's a reality and that stuff's really there, it's creepy.
Yeah, the thing about the movie The Exorcist is that if you were a, traditional believing religious person, then it took an element to your worldview, like this metaphysical worldview that reality is non-material. And there are
Mm-hmm.
these entities that are non-material called demons, and these demons are going to come and freaking get you. And just the visceral horror at seeing the physical transformations in the movie The Exorcist
Mm-hmm.
would also kind of play on like this more fundamental. See, I'm trying to think of the movie critic, but he was talking about how in our postmodern society we have all these anxieties about our body. We have
Yeah.
all these anxieties about mental health, and The Exorcist is a summation of all of that.
Yes.
So really, really creepy movie.
I agree. And it's literally like a manifestation of evil.
It is,
So
yeah.
it
I mean,
takes
it's
things that people
literally and
believe,
physically,
but
yeah.
it gives evil a body, which I think really goes back to what we were discussing. That's what horror does. It can take evil that just seems like this, more like an idea to some people, but it really fleshes it out and it's just in your face.
So that's a good segue to our next question then. What, in your opinion, makes for good horror?
Good horror, yeah, good question. Um, I'd say horror is like anything else in one way. It's got to have a good story. You have to have good characters. Atmosphere is important to me. And the thing that's different about horror, though, is you can have a B movie and I'll enjoy it. If you give me a B movie of some other genre, I probably won't make it through the film. So for me, it's a little weird. I can enjoy something like Night of the Demons, the original one from the 80s, or Witchboard.
Night
And
of the
most people
Demon.
wouldn't call
Yeah.
those good movies, but they're some of my favorites. But as far as what's actually good, then we'd look at The Exorcist, Halloween, the original one, Nightmare on Elm Street. And I think all of those things, you have great music, you're going to have great eerie atmosphere, compelling characters, and you're going to have excellent villains because your heroes are only as good as your villains. If you don't have a compelling bad guy, then the hero is just going to be boring and everything's going to fall short.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And can you explain the hate against John Carpenter's version of The Thing based
No.
on Campbell's short story Who Goes There? Like, to me, it has all of the elements that you were just talking about, a
Yeah,
creepy atmosphere,
I think it's a great movie.
one hell of a freaking villain. It's like, I mean, it's like existential nihilism, like come to physical form. Okay. And it's
Yeah.
like this monster. I mean, the music, especially in that movie, but the amount of hate that movie generates to this day it boggles my mind. And it's good horror too. It's
And
damn
especially
good.
nowadays, I feel like there's so many people that are just anxious to hate on something.
Oh, I
So
know.
I don't
man.
know. I don't know if it's always been that way, and maybe social media just makes it more apparent. But whatever the reason may be, I don't know why so many people would hate that movie.
You know, it's funny that you bring up social media. And right before that, you said that what makes a good main character is a good villain. And I kind of feel like a lot of in social media, it's making us the villain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's making your neighbor the villain. Yeah. And
or even sometimes I'll catch myself and I'm kind of the villain there. Why did I post that?
exactly.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's stuff that you wouldn't do if you had a person sitting down with you face to face. But when you're behind a keyboard, you'll just go at it and not think twice about it. And then when you do think twice about it, you go, oh, well.
So I'm definitely not name dropping, even though I am going to name drop right now. But Steve Skocek, he tweeted something out about a couple months ago, and this is kind of a theme in his observation. I don't know if you subscribe to his Substack. And as a matter of fact, I may have to add.
I don't think I'm subscribed, but I have read it.
Okay. As a matter of fact, I may have to put a link to his stuff in the show notes, actually, because it's kind of germane to what we're talking about. But he said it's this phenomenon of talking to an icon that's not the real person. You're talking to a title instead of what their name is in this dehumanization process. And what I've noticed myself is that it puts us all in the uncanny valley. We're like, hey, this is kind of a person. They kind of have feelings. They kind of have thoughts like I do, but it's not really a person.
That's a great observation.
So we just kind of act in this. It was Steve's originally. It wasn't mine.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, he made a great observation.
Oh yeah, for sure he did. So we were talking about movies, and in a lot of movies there's gore. In a lot of horror books, there are gore, there's slashers, there's guts, there's blood going everywhere. Oftentimes I'll hear someone make a comment like, well, I like horror movies, I like atmosphere, but I don't like blood or gore. With that being said, what's your opinion, and where does this fit or not fit into your own writing?
I love it all. About the only thing that personally I'm not a fan of in horror would be what some people call torture porn. So if you have too much torture, I just don't enjoy watching it. I don't hate on those movies. It's just, for me, it's not something that I enjoy. But everything else, I love slashers. Something like Friday the 13th, or if you've seen Halloween Kills, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the creative kills and something like that, I like that for the artistry, because all the special effects that go into it, I find that entertaining. And I also like your psychological horrors. I like more mystery kind of stuff, supernatural horror, or if it's just a human's a bad guy, I like it all. A good ghost story, love it.
Oh, yeah, and I think like if the gore and if the slashing and the splatter, if it helps tell the story, and like, well, kind of going back to John Carpenter's The Thing, if we take away the gore, do we really have a movie?
Good question.
Thank you.
We're Evil Dead 2, that's fairly gorely.
Oh, yeah.
New word, gorely.
Gorely, I like it.
Me too.
Hashtag gorely.
Gorely.
Hashtag haunted half moon in. You know, the thing about the Evil Dead movies is that what I liked about them is that they took some Lovecraftian mythos and they put it in it wasn't even a B movie, the original. I mean, it was a terrible C movie, if there is such a category. But damn it, they pulled it off.
They did.
Like, they
the whole
pulled
camera
it
angle
off.
they did, and with the trees.
Oh man, yeah. Oh yeah.
It was so creative for a low budget. That's probably one
for sure it was.
Really admire it. But the second one, yes, sequel's the best, because you get everything from the first one, but it's also a comedy.
Yeah. Well, like the first one didn't take itself seriously, and it wasn't funny. The second one didn't take it serious, or it didn't take itself serious at all, but somehow it was funny and scary. I mean, it has some genuine scenes in there where just the awfulness of his character and some of the scenarios he was caught in. But speaking of the Evil Dead, I know they had the Necronomicon in there, H.P. Lovecraft, all that. H.P. Lovecraft, from what scholars have looked at, from what other writers have looked at, it doesn't appear as though he believed in what today we would call high strangeness or paranormal. He was more of a materialist. Everything can be reduced down to molecules are bumping into one another, and somehow, that creates the entire, the universe that we see around us.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing up, did you ever experience anything strange or paranormal?
Yes. But before I get into what I experienced, my first introduction to it was really stories from my dad. He was the
Okay.
most
Yeah.
honest person that I've ever met, so I never questioned whether or not he was telling the truth. But even if I did question it, it doesn't matter because everyone, whether they were relatives or friends of his, that went to this house that he lived in when he was a kid, all experienced stuff that is worse than stuff that you see on TV. It was a real haunted house, and the place still gives me the creeps. And in fact, that's where the Haunted Half Moon Inn comes from. It was a farmhouse when my dad moved in there back in the 60s, but back in the day, it was actually an inn called the Half Moon Inn, and it was built in the late teens.
It was a real inn. Okay. All right, cool.
But some of the stuff that went on there, you'd have objects, you'd put it down, they'd end up somewhere else. Some of the earlier stories that I did on Haunted Half Moon Inn, I used some of the stuff that were my dad's stories, but I incorporated it in there. So the misplaced items would be one. Footsteps. They would always hear the toilet flush when there was nobody there. Footsteps up and down the stairs. So they'd be sleeping at night, and then you just hear boom, 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 someone going up and down the stairs. Look, nobody was there. They even heard laughing. They heard moaning, like, and the moaning they heard one time was about 2, 3 in the morning. It was like something wanted them to be awake. They were asleep, and like everyone in the family was just awake, and then there was moaning, and then there was no one in the house. So just really creepy stuff. And then people from the city, my dad's from the city originally, they would visit, and one relative would put a chair by the door for security at night. There was no lock on it. And she'd put the chair there and then turn around, the chair was gone. And then she put the chair back, turn around, the chair was moved from the door again. And then when she went to sleep at night, she felt arms coming out from the bed and just wrapped her up. So just to give you a sense of it. So those are his stories, and those stories inspired me to go kind of out of curiosity. And I made this a story, and the very first video I made for the channel was about my story. I went to his house, me and my best friend, and we were sitting in my 1990 Jeep before a football game. The engine was off, our hands are away from the wheel, and then all of a sudden the engine started to turn. My hands weren't touching it. And this is before there was keyless ignition, mind you. And it made a sound like when it's cold outside in the winter and the engine won't turn when you're turning the key. It made that sound, only no one was turning on the engine. So we got out of there. That would be one story. And another instance, I worked in a movie theater for my senior year in high school, and then on and off when I was in college. And everyone thought that the theater was haunted, and they would see a ghost there. I didn't personally see a ghost in that instance. I just would feel a similar presence to what I would feel at my dad's old haunted farmhouse, where it would get cold, and you just felt like you weren't alone. And it goes beyond fear, because I've been afraid of different things. I've had been robbed at gunpoint before, but this is a different kind of fear. It's hard to explain, I suppose, unless you've experienced it yourself.
When I was listening to your first couple of episodes of Haunted Half Moon Inn, I really got a sense of that. Like, not necessarily that this was based on true events, but when you talk about that fear and that visceral fear, and I'm trying to put a word on it, Tony, it's not quite coming to me, but I have 2 experiences in my life, which I will talk about at a later time. I don't think I'm going to talk about that tonight, but unless someone has been there. Unless someone has been in that situation before, it's really beyond words. I mean, it's kind of like on a cellular level, our body's been awakened to like this primordial predator that's in the same room with you. Like if you've ever gone, yeah, man. And like, if you've ever gone to like the zoo and there's like a big lion behind the glass or the cage or whatever,
yep.
and they say that the big cats can put out like this frequency, and they've actually measured this, like tigers and stuff, and they can paralyze their prey, and they can put out like this frequency that they create in their throat that disrupts like, the signals in your brain. And they use it to paralyze prey. They use it to track animals. I mean, it's crazy. It's
amazing.
If I could, and if I could crystallize that into words, that's the analogies that I would use for it. But
I think that's very fitting.
Thank you. So going to our next question then, has your perception or thoughts about the paranormal changed at all during your life? And where do you stand now, Tony?
It's an interesting question. It's because of my dad, I never doubted it. And then when I've had experiences, it just reinforces it. So I was never really in a situation where I could see the world as being only materialistic, where there's just biology and matter and nothing else. I've always known that there's something more, something spiritual, something unseen. So I don't think that's going to change. It hasn't changed. And then the outlook on it, I don't think anybody necessarily knows what's going on. Different people, different religions will all have their viewpoint and claim that it's the only answer, but I don't think any of us can really know for sure what it is.
So what do you think about ghost hunters? And I don't know if this was a question that we had gone over, but this is just kind of floating into my mind. And they will try and measure the temperature. They have instruments, and I don't know if you're familiar with Jimmy Akin, but he goes into detail on this with a guest on his podcast. I didn't know if you had dipped your toes in that world at all. If you had ever done ghost hunting, honest,
with the ghost hunters. So, from the old sci-fi show, and I think they're back on the air now. So I'm more familiar with that than Jimmy. I mean, I know Jimmy Akin; he's a Catholic apologist, but as far as ghost hunting goes, I haven't heard Akin speak to that. But if you're asking what I think about using machinery to try to capture some evidence, I think it's a good idea. I mean, how else are you going to investigate something unless you at least try to capture it in some way? And I don't know, because if it's unseen, it's probably not always going to be ideal for catching evidence. But if you can see an unseen force manipulating something that's not there, pretty compelling evidence, as long as you can prove that somebody didn't doctor the footage.
I love how you put it, Tony. Like you said, if we could get some evidence that, it's non-material, it's material, whatever kind of labels that we want to put on it. But if we could actually prove it one way or another, and this leads into the next question for you. This is a hypothetical question. Horror author Soren Narnia, he's the author of the Knife Point Horror podcast. I heard him ask a host of this, if you had a box, and inside that box was the answer to the question, is there a paranormal or super reality to our existence? Would you open the box, and here's the catch, at the cost of everything you owned? In other words, you'd lose everything material that you had, your house, your home, your bank account, your job, your source of income, all that. But you, Tony Capobianco, would know the answer to the question.
Well, the first thought that comes to mind is, how can I know that I can trust the box? How do I know what it's telling me? If I'm going to give up everything, how do I know it's not lying?
You're taking a good Rene Descartes view of it.
But let's say
I like that angle.
I won't be like that. I mean, I mean it. But to answer that question, I would say, no, I wouldn't open it, because I already believe that I know that there's something more out there. So I don't need to open a box to get proof of it. If that answered.
Yeah. And truth be told, there's no right or wrong answer. I know so I'm scheduled to have Soren on in about a week or so from now. Is it 2 weeks, a week? Man, I tell you what, I better check my calendar. I'm getting nervous. But if he asks me that question, my response is going to be the same as yours, Tony. I'm not going to open that damn box. And this is why. So when I was going to USC, I double majored in history and philosophy. And this was kind of a question that floated around. Oh, the philosopher had a chance to gain all the money in the world versus all the wisdom. He chose the wisdom. And then they asked the philosopher, hey, what's the very first bit of wisdom that you have for us? And he goes, I should have chose the wealth. I should have chose all the money. But for me personally, I think that when we die, we're going to know the answer to these questions one way or another.
I agree.
Either the Christopher Hitchens of the world's right, we're going to go into darkness from which we came, no existence, or the non-materialists among us are correct, and there's going to be chapter 2 of your existence.
I mean, really, when you get to it, that's the that's the only way anyone can be sure about it. But one day we'll all knock on that door and we'll see what's behind it. Hopefully not for a long time. But...
That's true. Well, I hear you on that. I can definitely stand to put that day off for, at least until I get all the kids out of the house. Knock on wood, knock on wood, knock on wood. But, so who is your favorite author, dead or alive? Who's your go-to guy or gal?
I'm going to go with Stephen King. I know we've talked in the past. I know he's not your favorite, but for me, he's definitely my favorite. Simply because I don't know of anyone who's better at making compelling characters. So even if I don't like where a story ends up, the ride is fun. And he just makes really complex, and they seem like real people. It doesn't seem like somebody just created something simply to get a point across in a story. They just feel real. So for me, it would be Stephen King. You and millions and millions and millions of other people as well. So, I mean, I would probably have the minority. What's that? I'm not original with that opinion.
But at the same time, you bring up a bunch of good points, though. I mean, Stephen King has very, very, very compelling characters, and oh my gosh, is he a great writer? I just, I kind of have my own thoughts on it.
Think about how much he writes. I don't know how he does it.
Oh man, yeah. Well, the Russians have nothing. Well, the Russians have Pushkin, and we have Stephen King. He was a very, very prolific writer. I mean, he basically became a part of the cultural landscape. And if you look at Stephen King now, I mean, Stephen King is going to be, long past the time when he's put down in the ground. They're going to be studying his books in schools. I mean, he's still going to be part of our cultural landscape in a much deeper way than Poe or Ambrose Bierce or any of those guys could ever have hoped to have achieved, I think.
I agree. The other great thing about that is the critics will be very upset.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't mean people that don't like him. I mean professional critics who say that he can't write and, but the truth is that's what people are going to remember. They're going to remember his books.
Well, I forget the year that he was given this, but he was given a literary fiction award. And if any of my author friends or reader friends are watching this, I'm going to sound so ignorant, as we say in the South. I'm going to sound ignorant right now, but I cannot remember what it's called. But I do remember a bunch of the literary critics, the professionals, just raking him through the coals, and I thought it was totally unfair, unfounded.
I agree.
So I think I know what Stephen King thinks about religion, because Lord, does he let you know what his opinion is. So what do you do you think, Tony, that religion helps or hurts fiction, or does it have any effect at all?
Yes.
Awesome. We can move on. Interview's over.
Just kidding.
That's it. Where's the button? I'm pushing it.
No, that's an excellent question. I think it, like anything else, it's pretty nuanced, and it really depends. So if you can write well with or without religion. I think where religion can become a hindrance is once you delve into the more fundamentalist forms of whatever religion. I'm familiar with Christianity, so whether it's a more traditional form or a fundamental form of Christianity, then it gets to a point where it can stifle all creativity. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm just saying in my experience, I know people that have been very fundamentalist, and they'll see Harry Potter as evil. They'll see even Lord of the Rings as evil. they'll see vampires as evil. And once you start seeing the devil under every rock, and it stifles the imagination. I think it sucks out creative oxygen, and you're going to be left with very hollow art, if you can even call it art, if it's fictional. I'm not saying that they can't do other things, but I think in that way it can harm writing. And then on the opposite end, it could be a problem too. If you're a strict materialist and you think that there's nothing, it doesn't mean that you can't be creative, but I think you're going to have a harder time coming up with supernatural things. I think it's going to be harder to create worlds that are unseen. And if you do write about it, it might not be quite as believable. It might come across as a bit tinny, if I may say. So probably something moderate view would be best for writing as far as religion goes, in my opinion.
Boy, there's a whole lot to unpack there, Tony. As a matter of fact, we could probably have an entirely separate discussion on that very issue.
Absolutely.
But just some observations, and I'm thinking off the top of my head right now. When I've seen people who are creative, they have a creative spark, they have a story they're working on that's sitting in their sock drawer. When they find traditional, confessional, hardcore religion, like you said, they lose that creative spark. And I love the analogy that you said of the oxygen just being sucked out of their lives, it seems. And we're not saying that religion is bad necessarily.
No, not at all.
Okay?
No,
but what we are saying is that when it sucks up the bandwidth of your imagination to where you're following the precepts of this religion, of this holy book, of piety,
and it becomes more like the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law, I think is what we're saying.
Precisely, yeah. And you end up with fictional propaganda where the religion is artificially inserted into it. I mean, it's...
Yes.
But what I have seen, though, is I've seen some religious folk get very religious, lose that creative spark. But I've also seen the materialists, among us, our friends, who are friends of mine, they're authors and they've written. It seems like they can hold on to that creative spark much better and longer than the fundamentalists can. And that's just an observation I've had, because it seems like, Billy, Bob, and Joe, they're atheists now, but they can still create incredible fiction. Yet when I hear that, Billy, Bob, and Susie over here, they've converted to the whatever church of whatever, choose your poison again, then, okay, then I guess the bottle is going to be capped on their creativity. And that seems to be just a common pattern to it. I don't know, just an observation.
Yeah, and I agree with you. But like I said, I think it's more when you just get to, it's about the extremes. Extremes in either direction, I think, can have a negative effect on any creativity, especially writing.
I can remember, and I know that we're going off of a question, but we kind of covered this earlier, so I'm just going to kind of give some thoughts, and you can give some thoughts on this. But, the subject of religion and writing, but something else that was in my mind is when you and me were growing up, the big boogeyman was TV.
Yes.
Now, I think you and me have both established that TV was central in our development and what we would later consume in entertainment, and maybe even our worldview to an extent.
Sure, it has been.
Oh, yeah. And, it wasn't just horror stuff that inspired us, but what do you think of horror TV now or shows right now? Do you have any preferences? Is there anything that's more contemporary that's your go-to horror film or your movies to watch?
I like the new stuff. I like the old stuff. As you can see from my shirt, I like the new version of It. I like the old miniseries version with Tim Curry. I love them both. They're different, two different takes on the same character. I like, let's see, what's a good show that's on right now? American Horror Story. I like the earlier seasons. I didn't care for the most recent season, but that's a newer show, so that's another one that we can count. What else is new?
So I don't know if you've seen The Penny Dreadful.
No,
you
I
seen
have. I've
that?
heard of it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. That was really, really good. So they managed to take some of the classic monsters, your vampires, your witches, your werewolves, all that, and they managed to present a more contemporary view of the monsters while still retaining some of that metaphysical dimensions to them. And everything is taking place in like this steampunk, this Victorian, industrial city of London.
Mm-hmm.
And they sprint over to like the American Wild West. So of course, it's horror fiction, so they're going to be taking some liberties, but
Yeah.
that's really, really, really good. And I don't know if you've seen Archive 81.
Yes, I saw that. That was on Netflix. That was very good.
Oh yeah. Now, as a suspenseful movie, as kind of a horror movie, I thought that was spot on. It had a lot of the same elements we were talking about. So
I agree. That was a good one. Thanks for reminding me of that.
yeah.
I can't believe I haven't seen Penny Dreadful. It sounds like it's right up my alley. I know how I missed it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to connect with you on Twitter, which there is a link in the show notes and pinned comment. And
Okay.
I'm going to have to send you a link to it so you can watch that. It's definitely worth watching.
Absolutely.
So I guess to kind of close us out, these next couple of questions, I would like to talk about the work itself and kind of dive into it.
Okay.
And I guess as a teaser, I understand that there's going to be a story coming out this Friday.
Not this Friday, but next Friday.
Or not this Friday. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I was about to
This
read
Friday
your
I have,
entire script. Yeah.
This Friday is just
the entire thing out. I am moving an entire sheet of stuff I was gonna...
Well, no, this Friday I don't have a story.
You ruined it.
This Friday I just have an ambiance video with like thunderstorms and like Halloween kind of stuff. But it's not a story. So my next story is the Sinister Scarecrow. It's going to be called Haunted Possession. Sinister Scarecrow. That's the next one.
Awesome.
I just finished writing it. Just got to finish the video.
Awesome, man. Well, we are looking forward to it. So speaking of the Haunted Scarecrow, what does the writing process and production look like for your stories, Tony?
Yeah, that's a harder question. For me, it's not always the same. I don't think I really have like a method or a technique, but I'll come up with an idea sometimes just from observing something. So in one story, I had mentioned I had used a security alarm as one of the scarier parts of the story. And in that instance, the alarm had said, there's something in the house. And the genesis of that was simply, I have a security alarm. And I thought, what if this happened? So I'll take everyday things and then it just becomes part of the story. And then as far as characters go, I'd say the best description I've heard, because it applies to how it works for me, is I think it was Stephen King that said it's like sitting around a campfire at night and you see dark silhouettes right along the darkness, between the darkness and the light, and you call them forward one by one. And as they come closer, you get all the details. So to me, that's kind of how the characters develop. I kind of get a faint idea of them, and as they approach the light, they kind of get fleshed out, and that's how we learn who they are. Because as I'm writing it, I'm learning just as when you're listening to the story, you're reading the story, you're learning as you go along. Really, as I'm writing it, I'm learning as I go along. I don't really have a template where someone has to be this way, they have to have all these attributes. It just kind of flows.
So I think you kind of answered my wild card question. And the wild card question I had is, do you outline or do you just free write? It sounds like you do a little bit of both. Okay. Okay, cool. Oh, wow.
I mean, the outline would be very, very basic. Like a title. And sometimes I might have an idea how I want the story to begin and end, but everything in between is unknown. I don't even know what know that.
Well, so like for your vampire series, let's see, that was 3 stories, right? Or was that 4?
So far 3. Yeah.
Oh, okay, 3. So was that page 1 and chapter 1, and then just boom, 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 boom?
That one, that one's a little different. Okay. Because in my mind,
there's a lot of moving parts in it. Yeah. Yeah,
it's only 3 episodes so far, but I'd like to continue that for quite some time. I might even put everything together and make it a book eventually. But that is an instance where I had a big picture in my mind, so I have a vague outline of where I want to go, but still to get the parts together, that's all. There's no outline for that. I just have a general structure of it, if that makes sense. The bones.
Oh, yeah, sure. It sounds like a really authentic way of writing, and I imagine it's really exciting. Like, do you ever have, any anxiety whenever you sit down to write? Is it like, oh man, I hope this is going to turn out? Or
no, actually, the writing is my favorite part of it. I don't really enjoy the narrating, even knowing that's essential because that's how I'm getting my story out there. But the writing, I love it. I lose track of time. 2-3 hours can go by, and I'll be like, I thought it was 20 minutes. But I don't get any stress with that. That kind of flows. It's hard work. Don't get me wrong, but it's something that I take joy in. I just like it.
Well, I can certainly hear you on the narration part. I know from my history podcast, writing it, researching it especially. Oh man, I tell you what, I could go deep just researching my topic, and then there was the editing for the podcast, which I think what you're doing is, so for those who have not checked Tony's work out, you can find his work on YouTube. Again, there will be a link in the show descriptions, but should you guys be checking his work out, you will hear him narrating a story, and he has some images. Man, I sound like my grandmother describing like the first time she opened a laptop. It's got these pictures that move and talk, and your cousin has a box. I know he plugs in, yeah. So Tony's stories are narrated by him. Yeah, they are narrated by Tony. They are original to him, and the images. The images will have basically what you're narrating. How do you choose those images? Because the images flow very, very well with your narration. And
thank you.
If you're describing a scene, you'll have a picture, or you'll have a, series of pictures, like flowing water in your vampire tale. I think that was episode 1 of that.
Yeah,
and, how do you
a little
choose
bit of licensed footage to go with the pictures, mix them up. But how do I do it? The hardest part, honestly, is trying to find things that are either public domain or things that I've already paid to have a license to. So all of the footage that I use, I have a license to use it. And the pictures, I just look for public domain. So there are other pictures I would love to use, but I don't have the rights to them. So I really just do the best I can. I'll spend hours looking for pictures that will work, that will fit the story.
Well, I think your work is really, really paying off, Tony, because your subscription count is going up. It's going up. Your viewership is going up.
It was a pleasant surprise. Hopefully now that spooky season is here, I'm hoping that it'll go up more. The Half Moon Inn needs more guests.
Well, so I'm going to make a prediction. I think based on the amount of awesome content that you are producing, Tony, the quality of your stories, and
by the way, I want everyone to know that I genuinely enjoy your stories because you have them up on your YouTube channel as well. I know you changed the name recently, but your stories are excellent. And I know you write them and you narrate them yourself. And I respect that. I know it's hard work, but you're a good writer.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And, just writing those stories it gave me a deeper appreciation for authors everywhere and what they go through to try and make those stories a reality. So what's the favorite story you've written and narrated so far?
I really like the vampire one, but I'm excited about the one, and I'm not doing this just to push it, the Sinister Scarecrow. I had a really good time writing that one. And I don't know if people are going to be interested in something with a scarecrow in it, but it's a fun time, I thought.
What I like about your writing, in these horror tales is that they really are good mythos. I mean, they're your classical monsters. And though,
as you can see, I like classical monsters. I have the Count standing next to me.
The Count is looking a little shrunk. I think he's going to be looking for Mina or Lucy after this show. So you better put some garlic up or something, Tony. And so finally, Tony, what is the future of Haunted Half Moon in, where do you see your channel going in a year from now? I have a prediction. I think you're going to reach over 2,000 subscribers a year from now. At least that.
That's my goal.
What I said about, and previously what I said about my prediction, I think by the end of October, you're going to have 500 to 800 subscribers. Is where I think your show is going to be.
I hope so. I'm shooting for 1,000, but I think that's not so likely. It's a big goal, but we'll see if that can happen. And then from there, I'm just gonna. It's not so much. I want to have subscribers, but I just want to focus on the work. And if the stories are good, and as long as people are aware that the stories are there, I want them to check it out. Hopefully, they'll like it. And then maybe we can all grow together.
Awesome.
For me, I mean, I'm still learning. I'm not Stephen King, but I'm trying to improve as I go along.
Well, they say that with quantity comes quality, and your very first story was good. It was definitely better than my first story. As far as quality and any kind of metric that you could measure it.
I don't know about that. I liked yours, so.
I like mine too, but I'm kind of not an impartial judge of it. But so I think that if you're going to look at the difference in quality between story 1, and this goes for any author out there, and story 100. Story 100 is just going to beat the pants off of story 1 any day. And so I'm really, really interested, Tony, in what Haunted Half Moon Inn is going to look like after Halloween of this year and after the first of the new year of next year. Because I think that is going to be even more awesome than what it is now.
I hope so. I appreciate that. I'm gonna try my best.
For sure, we can definitely see it. And as viewers and listeners, we certainly appreciate you agreeing to step into the labyrinth with me and kind of go over your work, Tony.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Frank, for having me.
Anytime, and I hope to have you back on again, Tony.
Definitely, this was fun. Oh,
yes,
and
sir.
Before I forget, just because you don't see them doesn't mean
they're not there. Exactly. And good night. Thank you, Tony.
Good night.